Okay. Karen, I would like to talk a little bit about problems of addiction with you. You have written some things on that I find fascinating, and interviewed some people who seem to know a lot about it. I suppose that's one way that, as a journalist, you continue to learn, isn't it? Through interviewing people and having to do stories on particular topics. It is a really good way to work your way into an area, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. That's true. I think journalism is great for those of us who like to be eternal students. We're always learning.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. I think of teaching that way a lot for myself.
Mm-hmm, that's true.
When there's a new topic to take on, or someone asks me to lecture on a different question, or one is going to get interviewed on a question, then it's time to read your way into it, to grab up the material and to see what you can come to learn about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have done some work on this addiction question, and there'd probably be so many ways of approaching the question. We could think of our own personal addictions, the compulsive behavior that seems to take us over and keep us from acting effectively, so that people could be alcoholics or workaholics, I suppose. But also another way of looking at it is the destructive potential it has for human relationships. So I'd like to focus on that aspect of it, addiction and our personal relationships, and begin to look a little bit at what goes wrong there. I mean, it seems like obvious ways. I remember driving in a cab in New York one time, and the cab driver said to me, I said, well, can you get me to LaGuardia in 20 minutes? Mm-hmm. He said, I'll bet you I can get you there in under 20 minutes. And I said, well, I don't know if I want to bet or not. But he really wanted to bet me, and then he began to tell me that he had by saying that he was glad I didn't bet him, and that he had violated an important trust with his wife. That he was a compulsive gambler and had lost the house and lost almost everything, and that he was trying to deal with this. And I jump in the cab, and the first thing he wants to do is bet me about whether he's going to get me to the airport in a certain amount of time. Incidentally, I think he would have lost his bet, by the way, so he saved the house or the cab or something. But what he was trying to tell me was how that messed up the relationship with his wife. I mean, it's obvious if you gamble away the house, the other spouse isn't going to be too happy about it. And you begin to think of the problems from her viewpoint. I mean, wondering every night he went out what they would have lost when he comes home and so on. So that would be maybe a concrete example of in a large way of what could go wrong, but I suppose in a lot of other ways it could happen as well.
Right. In the family system, there is an unhealthy dynamic that's set up because of an addiction, and it affects the spouse, as you said, and also the children. There's an unpredictability about living with an addicted person. And so one learns to feel secure, or to have a smoother day. You might kind of tiptoe around that person, or try to find out how to respond to that person so you won't upset them. Make sure that they're rescued when they need to be rescued from the results of their addiction, which only plays into their addiction more because they're not able to feel the full results of it themselves. What people in Alcoholics Anonymous have called bottoming out. If you keep rescuing someone, they're not going to bottom out, and they'll never realize the extent of their problem and seek help.
When you were talking, I was thinking about a lot of young people I've talked to who will describe their family situation of trying to hide from their alcoholic parent, trying to get out of their way, checking out to see if indeed they had been drinking and they knew their mood would alter, and trying to predict that and to avoid the troubles that would ensue. I mean, that really ran their lives. Their whole outlook, behavior, ways of operating were dictated by the alcoholic parent in this situation. So, I mean, you can begin to see how that would just color everything that you would do. And it's hard for someone who grew up in a healthier family than that, I suppose, to even imagine what it would be like. But you can start to get a little feel of the psychic disturbance that would occur, knowing, you better go hide in your room when your father came home late at night or something.
Yeah. There's also, I think, in many families where there is an addiction, a neglect of the children, an emotional abandonment of them, because the addicted parent is so involved in his or her addiction, the spouse is so involved in the addicted spouse, and the children are kind of left to fend for themselves. And the result of that, I think, is that these abandoned, neglected children, who may not actually be neglected in the sense of physical needs, just feel that I must not be worth enough to have attention paid to me. It's kind of, an emotional abandonment. And so they start developing a low sense of themselves, a low self-esteem, a sense of worthlessness about themselves, and a sense of shame at the core of their being, that there must be something wrong with them. If they were better children, their father wouldn't be drinking, or their mother wouldn't be taking drugs, or what other addiction is being used. If they just did the right thing, their parents would treat them better. Abused children feel that way as well.
I suppose this is a natural kind of reaction on their part. I mean, to think it's their fault if something goes wrong, because you presume the parents know what they're doing, or that they're generally right, and therefore if there's things wrong in the family, then the youngster says it must be my fault. And then I suppose part of what they do is try to guess all the time of what they could do better, or how they could change things to make it work properly.
Right. And so what they end up doing is reacting to not just their parents, and I think here's one of the most difficult things about this kind of behavior, is that it carries over into other relationships. You don't just relate to your parents that way, but you begin to relate to everybody that way. And so you become reactive. You kind of have to feel out how people are going to respond to you, so you could respond in a way that they'll accept you. That tiptoeing through life is basically what you end up doing, not really acting out of your spontaneous self, but always wondering, what can I do to get this person's approval, their affirmation, their emotional availability? How can I get them in some way indebted to me? And so what happens is you become very manipulative in a hidden way, sometimes so hidden I don't think even you realize it yourself. You don't realize you're, like in your relationships, you're setting up hidden agendas. You might think you're being a very giving and selfless person, trying to do things for people, and not realize that you're doing that so that they will love you, and you'll have some sort of debt that they owe you.
One word that came to my mind when you were first started describing that was the word trust. That seems that what happens often in these situations is that people can't trust normal relationships and can't trust normal responses, and therefore it seems to me that when it gets applied to other relationships, then there's almost an unwillingness to risk, or a constant fear that the other person will be erratic in their behavior, and that you won't know how to handle it. And therefore I suppose that's part of the reason that one gets more manipulative and controlling. In other words, it seemed to me that at the bottom of that is this sort of lack of trust that goes on in among the youngsters in a family where addictive behavior is prevalent. I was thinking again of the literature on the adult children of alcoholics. I guess that would bring out a lot of what we're talking about here, the relationship between addiction and personal relationships. But I think that those young people find out when they read the books of people who grew up in addictive families, those books are often so eye-opening to them. Like, my heavens, does somebody really know what it's like? Are there other people around who have experienced what I've gone through in my life? I think they find it very liberating just to read that literature. And then I know some situations where they've then gotten together and talked and in one-on-one or whatever, and then it seems to be even a stronger sort of therapy that goes on, because then they're able to interact with a person who says, yeah, that happened in my family too, or do you remember when you used to run and hide? And I think that lifts them out of their isolation very often. Of course, that happens to all of us in anything. Whenever we share something that we don't like about ourselves or that's going wrong in our world, some weakness, some limitation, and another person accepts that in a non-judgmental way or says, I've had a similar experience, well, it liberates us. We do think, well, I'm not weird, and I'm still part of the human race, and here's someone else who might understand me. So that's what I've seen in talking with some of these collegians who are involved in those kinds of relationships and have been dealing with addictive parents.
Yeah, when you talked earlier about children growing up in dysfunctional families, like an addicted family, don't realize what normal is. I think maybe they assume that normal is what they experienced, and so that's one reason why it's so eye-opening when they start reading about their life experiences as not being healthy. It's as if you walk around not having 20/20 vision, and nobody tells you need glasses. Mm-hmm. When you put them on, then you realize, this is what other people see. I thought everybody saw the way I did. And so it's kind of like coming to that discovery. I thought everybody had these feelings of needing to control and feeling that people are unpredictable and not trusting, and realizing, no, it's because of what the messages you internalized as a mm-hmm. child.
Karen, should we try to give some more examples of where this happens? We got all kind of addictive behavior, right? We use mm-hmm. the term workaholism, so you can be addicted to work and use that as an escape from forming relationships in your family or friends. We obviously have alcoholism. Yeah. I mentioned gambling in the original example there. Mm-hmm. We know the addiction to drugs, and these days I guess we're so aware of the tremendous addictive qualities of things like crack, mm-hmm. and which one would hope would scare people enough to keep them from trying it or using it, but I guess that sort of approach doesn't always work. But, it would seem like a good thing to remember that it has tremendous addictive power, and therefore one better be careful of using it in the first place. But so those would be some of the addictions. Do you want to add to that at all?
There's food. That's a favorite addiction of many people. Sexual behavior. Do we mention that? You can also be addicted to a role you play, not just work you do, but maybe identifying with the role, your title, or gender roles. Some people are so encased in the stereotypical male or female role that it becomes almost an addiction for them, an unhealthy addiction. I guess you can say in general, any behavior or substance that you turn to alter your mood or to numb your feelings is an addiction. And some other people would throw in the extra example of, or the description, something over which you are powerless.
Mm-hmm. That, of course, goes back to Alcoholics Anonymous, and mm-hmm. one of the things they want people to see that having a problem with alcohol,
That's
that
right.
they're powerless over it.
That's right.
It's a little harder to see that addiction to the role. Does that really numb people, and does it... that they're powerless over it? I guess that could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you could...
Can we think of an example like that? How about a priest who was addicted to the role of being a priest?
Oh, sure, and not really accept themselves as being maybe imperfect because they have a feeling of that the role has to be a certain way and they have to live out that role a certain way. Sure, I think that's real possible.
And then being unable to relate to people as a person, mm-hmm. but only through the role.
Only through the role.
That would be the kind of old model we had of the priest being on the pedestal, maybe, and having to stay on the pedestal and not being able to relate in some sort of warmer or more constructive way with the members of the congregation.
Mm-hmm. And when they come into a situation maybe where they're not put on a pedestal, then it's devastating to them and they don't know what to do. Somebody told me, a priest told me that he thought that one of the reasons for a lot of priests leaving the priesthood after the Second Vatican Council was that the role of the priest was no longer as clear as it was, and respect was not always automatic, and a lot of priests just identified themselves in those terms. And when that definition was no longer available to them, they were nothing. They were empty without it, and there was nothing for them to do but leave.
Mm-hmm. I could well see that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a telling analysis that you've offered there. So you could think of people getting addicted to a lot of different roles. I suppose we could mm-hmm. talk about some women getting addicted to the role of being a mother, huh?
Sure, and not maybe not pursuing other abilities or talents they have. And the empty nest syndrome is very, it's a classic kind of situation where the children leave home and the parents don't know how to relate to themselves, even to each other, but within themselves they don't know how to relate, as a person. Who am I now without mm-hmm. this title of mother or father.
Right, and especially when one would have been so absorbed in that role for so long. I mean, that is such an all-consuming kind of role,
Sure.
With constant demands and that taking up most of one's time, and one being known that way, thought of that way, dealt with in relationship to one's children. You could easily see that, how that could happen. I suppose then one would want to sort of factor in a psychological element to menopause, saying that, you won't be a mother anymore, and that has some other psychic message that's delivered as well. That causes some sort of anxiety about this new situation one is in.
If you identify yourself in those terms, right? I've seen attempts within the women's movement to look at menopause as a positive kind of transitional period, and there are even some wonderful prayer services to acknowledge that, where you see and accept it as a reality for you that brings another dimension to your life. It's not a lack of something, but it's an addition.
I was thinking that people who are retiring could do the same thing.
Sure.
You could be sort of compulsive about your job, but if you could find a more positive way of thinking about it as a transition and new opportunities and so on, that would be very helpful. Karen, that takes us into the whole question of how we're going to try to deal with these addictive relationships and addictions that harm relationships. A number of things occurred to me as we were going along there. One was that it seems vitally important to have some healthy relationships where people maybe won't allow us to act in a compulsive way or to follow out addictive behavior. That would seem to be very helpful to someone who's trying to fight their way out of this or find a new way of relating.
Sure. I think the essential first element, though, is to recognize where you are. If you are, in fact, a person who has, maybe because of a relationship with an addicted person, you have a certain way of being yourself. There's a word that's been popping up in psychological circles in the last, 10, 15 years, called codependency. And it really, it evolved from a word, co-alcoholic, which was applied to people who lived with alcoholics and became caught up in their own addicted system. And so they began to relate a certain way to them, as we talked about before. I think codependency is a broader term then. Maybe one way of thinking of it is that here's a person, a dependent person, a person who's dependent on some compulsion or addiction, and the person who relates to them is the codependent. It means an unhealthy dependence on external forces, other people, events in your life. You're always kind of reacting to what's out there rather than acting, again, as we said, spontaneously from the core of your being.
Okay, an example would be a husband of an alcoholic, so that he sort of plans his life around his alcoholic wife and is always on tiptoes around her and always wondering how he's going to please her or keep her from drinking too much or how he's going to get her home from the party, so that his whole sort of mode of living is dependent upon her.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And so he begins to forget what he feels and thinks, and he doesn't have much chance to decide for himself how he's going to behave at the party or what they're going to do together, but he's always reacting to her moods or to her drinking.
There's kind of a loss of boundaries here. You forget where you end and the other person begins, because what the other person is doing is so important to you, and it seems to have such a great impact on your life. And as a result, you try to control them, and then you apply that to other relationships and events in your life as well. You're always trying to control, which can lead to a very stressful life. I mean, you're always kind of holding everything together, with your willpower, and that can be a real drain on your energy.
As you said, the first step in this whole therapy is to recognize one's situation.
Right.
Whether you are the person who is the addict or whether you are the person who is codependent on them. So you have to recognize the dynamics of the relationship, see how it's hurting you and the other person, and then begin to make plans and to change your behavior, find
Sure.
ways to act in a different fashion.
And it's not always easy to recognize your codependency if, in fact, maybe you're not the spouse, maybe you're a child of somebody who is addicted, or not even just addicted, but you could be the child of somebody who is emotionally disturbed in some way. Maybe you're the grandchild of an addicted person, and it's been those behavior characteristics of codependency have been passed on through messages that you got from your parents and they got from their parents and so on. So that's why I think awareness is so important and often very difficult, very challenging to get that awareness.
I was thinking of the group Al-Anon, and while I don't know it firsthand, I've certainly dealt with a lot of people who've gone to Al-Anon, and I often think they're among the most insightful people I've met on this question.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me what they learn is that they can't be responsible for the other person's behavior.
That's
that
right.
They have to act out of their own needs. They have to take care of themselves, and they can't be walking around on tiptoes all the time worrying about what the addictive person is going to do. They get a proper letting go, it seems to me.
Yes.
And which is terribly important in human relationships, I think. So that again would be a good clue, I guess, as to how to work out healthy relationships, so we don't feel just totally responsible for the other person all the time, but we have our own outlook, our own needs, our own understandings, and those have to get factored into any kind of healthy relationship.
Right. There are a number of those Anon groups. There's an R-Anon for people who are in relationship with somebody addicted to narcotics, and there's O-Anon for people in relationship to overeaters. And as I said, a number of others. Adult children of alcoholics groups deal with codependency as well. Another element I think that they learn besides letting go and not being responsible for other people is a self-acceptance. They can be the way they are without always caring if other people are going to accept them or not. Their own worth doesn't depend on somebody's affirmation, because it sometimes is a very difficult lesson to learn, but you can't please everyone. And if you're not feeling good about yourself, you're always going to go through life trying to get that approval from outside yourself, and that never works.
I wonder if that isn't even just habitual. Even people who don't maybe or have a fairly good self-image, who just sort of get in the habit of thinking they have to please everyone all the time, and that if anyone opposes them or doesn't like them or whatever, that something is wrong. In other words, I think that it could be almost just a habitual way of responding to life.
Sure. Maybe it's something that we have to grow into, mature into, because as children, what we're doing is always pleasing our parents and our teachers and other authority figures. And somewhere along the line, we have to realize that it's okay not to always please them, because we have to please ourselves first.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I mean, that tells us that it is something that has to be learned in a way. You have to try on a new mode of acting or interacting with other people.
Right, yeah.
So the main thing you're saying here is that to keep in focus how we're going to try to help people or help ourselves deal better with compulsions or this codependency is we got to recognize the dynamics of what's going on, how we get sucked in to the relationship, and how other people manipulate us, and how we tend to do that to others. And then part of what we're going to do to get out of it is to have greater self-acceptance, feel better about ourselves, know our own strength and capabilities, know that we have something to contribute.
Yes.
And then we're going to have to be careful of always trying to please others. We're going to have to say, well, I can't always please others. I have to sort of go with the flow here, or see what happens, or live with the fact that some people don't like the way I'm behaving.
And be in touch with where you are and pleasing yourself and knowing what your values are, and being content with that. Getting rid of all those old messages that told you were not good or not perfect or not acceptable because you made mistakes. I like to repeat something I heard John Bradshaw. He's a psychologist and a theologian who's done some PBS shows on family therapy, and he says that it is human to make mistakes, and so if you want to be the perfect human, then make mistakes. Make mistakes.
This is a way of graphically bringing across the point that one can't get sucked into a perfectionism, because that will end up hurting you in the long run.
That's right. Another thing I think about is the example from The Wizard of Oz. how that is an example of somebody learning about codependency, how Dorothy and her friends were trying to find something that they thought was outside themselves. They thought they had to get from the wizard, whether it was a medal or a diploma or a clock that was ticking. And what they learned at the end was that they had those qualities all along, and they demonstrated those qualities in relationship to other people as they lived together.
So we can draw on the Wizard of Oz
yes,
to make
right.
his point.
Right.
That's
and
really good.
You can't go outside yourself. And one of the things that I think the good witch tells Dorothy is that she always had the power to go home. But if she had told Dorothy that at the beginning, Dorothy would not have believed her. And so it's a process of learning that the power is within you to be yourself, to be affirming of yourself, to feel good about yourself.
I want to get back to that other thing I was saying about needing the healthy relationships. It seems like one of the things we would need is sort of models like that we would need people, maybe we'd have to be able to look at other relationships that are healthy, but then maybe also it would help us, if we're addictive, to have someone else who won't play into that, who won't play our game.
Sure.
Now, I find myself reacting instinctively that way often to people. When I can feel that game going on, I will just almost instinctively not play. I mean, I can feel it within myself. Karen, can you comment on that rather briefly, because we're going to run out of time?
Well, I think that happens in 12-step groups where you see people cutting off somebody else and letting them know that they're not behaving in healthy ways. They're going back to the old ways of thinking. And because it's a sharing group of similar backgrounds, they can do that without feeling rejected.
Yeah, they get away with it.
Yeah.
Don't give me that stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, I won't buy it.
That's right.
Well, Karen, we've been talking about addictive behavior and especially how it affects human relationships. It's so obvious in a lot of family situations where alcoholism helps to ruin things, and we really, to get out of it, we need to be very aware and self-accepting, and then look for other ways of trying to relate.